All right, good people. Glad to see y'all. Richard, how you doing, brother?
Hey, I'm doing well, doing well. Looking forward to this, man.
All right. No doubt, no doubt. Now we got a special treat today for really special guest to the podcast.
Mm.
Educator extraordinaire has been doing incredible things in these streets and
Yes.
also on these social media platforms, I might add. And he has even ventured into the realm of being an author. So we can't wait to chop it up about that. So welcome our good brother Akil Parker of All This Math. How you doing, good brother?
I'm good, man. I'm glad to be back on here.
All right.
This is outstanding.
So first thing I gotta say, man, it's been a little while since we had a chance to actually sit down and chop it up. So, man, you gotta talk to us, man. What have you been up to? One of the dope things that I've been able to see in terms of your journey is you're a math educator. You been teaching at Cheney University, the first HBCU. Don't get it twisted. It was the first, and we can always talk about that. But then you've also had an opportunity to really travel the country, talking to people about mathematics and really talking to our community about the importance of learning mathematics. So I guess one of the questions that I have for you is, now that you've been able to travel a bit across the country and talk to, different pockets of our community across the nation, man, what are some things that you've been able to see, man? What are some things that you've been able to glean from your travels?
Well, it's kind of like, one of the things that Malcolm told us, it's the same game going all the time, in terms of how, there's a lot of, math deficiencies that our people have. And I don't think it's coincidental or accidental, because one of the things I realize about mathematics is that math is really synonymous with problem solving. But when we, I guess, take a mathematical approach to even thinking about problems and what they are, we understand that, one person's problem is another person's solution. Or basically that, from every problem that we have, there are people, individuals and groups that benefit from us having those problems. So it's become very clear to me that one of the reasons that, we have to be, and I think, our scholars such as like Amos Wilson and people of that nature, talked about this extensively, that, we have to be deficient in mathematics as a people in order to status quo. So, and, another thing that, Baba Amos said was that the challenge really for the system that we live under is to how to give the impression that they're actually attempting to enable us to learn mathematics while at the same time making sure that we don't, mass, that's the real challenge, like how to create that balance. Whereas like, I got to make it look like we're trying to change things and improve education, improve educational systems, but actually we don't really want to, and then we also got to kind of create and maintain this narrative that if you folks aren't learning math, it's all your fault. You're not working hard enough, your parents aren't doing this, or, you should be doing this and doing that, and not to say that there isn't some personal responsibility that, should be considered, but it's really definitely a systemic issue. So in my travels, I see the same thing. A lot of people just having kind of a negative disposition around mathematics, and
no doubt.
which again is very helpful, because, if you can convince people that, math is irrelevant, and even get to the point where people kind of try to shield their ego and say things like, I don't need math. Like, well, first they say it's hard, convince people to believe that it's too difficult to achieve at, and then get them to say that it's irrelevant. So as a way to like kind of shield your ego. Then what you're actually saying is, what you're getting people to say without realizing it, is that problem solving is too hard and problem solving is relevant. And once you say that, now those groups and people that benefit from the maintenance of certain problems, then they become very safe and they become very comfortable, and they don't have to worry about, ever losing their status or their power, and that's kind of how, that's like I guess like a socio-political approach I take to mathematics, and and the fact that it's much deeper than just the numbers and the X's and the Y's that we see on the board. And unfortunately, even myself as a classroom educator earlier on in my career, I didn't see those connections. So I wasn't able to really articulate that for my students and let them know, like, bro, like this is deeper than this textbook. This is about your ability to think critically, your ability to analyze information, your ability to see not only what's going on right now, but what's about to happen. From just because it's all, you should be able to recognize trends, recognize like the equation, there's an equation for everything. Even if we don't know the equation, there's something mathematical going on that we should ideally we would be able to prepare for. But, when we kind of just check out from mathematics, then, we're kind of unable to do that, or at least not able to do it as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, you might have shared this in the last time you were on, but I'd love for you to speak a little more about this, because you're looking at math not as just solving mathematical equations, not just looking at numbers, but you're really saying, this is a way to help us to develop in our minds almost a routine of problem solving. Like we are able to condition ourselves to solve complex problems that's going on in our society or going on in our communities. So my question is, how do you change or shift the narrative for folks to understand that? How are you able or have been able to go into communities, speak to young people, so older folks, whoever, and help them to make that connection?
Well, my hope is that, I've also like been, not in addition to the traveling, I've been like, trying to get on like a lot of, radio shows and podcasts such as this one, and just have these conversations. One of the things I realized is, it's kind of like with Du Bois, right? I think about Du Bois when he realized that, early in his life, in order to get Black people from out of the condition that we were in, he believed in education as being like, the key to that. But then as he got older, he realized that education wasn't enough. It's also an issue of propaganda. Mm-hmm. So what I realized in terms of mathematics is that far too often, especially in our communities, the conversations around math are very like negative. It's always people talking about how they were never good at math, or, they were good at math. They liked math up until, the letters got introduced, So I just think we have to, for one thing, start having more positive conversations around mathematics. Start, showing people, people in the Black community that actually are thriving and are living comfortably, that utilize mathematics or, are in STEM disciplines and in STEM fields. So that's one of the things. It's really, it's a PR thing. It's really like a PR issue. Cause like we don't have generally we don't have no problem believing that we can be rappers and singers and, and dancers and, and be athletes. We don't have no problem with that because of the way those things are marketed to us. Yep. Math is really marketed, in direct and both indirect and direct ways, in a way such that we as Black people are made to think that it's not for us. I think about Lisa Delpit's book, Multiplication is for White People. And that was a quote that a young brother made, an elementary school student, said to her when she was observing a classroom somewhere in Louisiana, that, the young brother was basically like, yeah, we can do addition and subtraction, but, multiplication and division, that stuff is more difficult. Like multiplication is for white people, so that belief, those types of beliefs really permeate. Yeah. And I think part of the reason they permeate is because we're not having enough, positive conversations around mathematics and, talking to young people about how they can use mathematics on a daily basis and on a regular basis, and also showing the utility of math. Like classroom teachers always get bombarded and hit with this question. Like, usually it comes from a frustrated student. Like, when am I going to use this stuff? Why do I got to know this? And a lot of classroom teachers don't have a good answer for that.
Right.
But what you realize is there are a lot of answers to that question. And actually, you might think that the child is just trying to be, a jerk, but actually it's an excellent question because, and I think as a math educator, you really should have some answers. You got to have some answers for that question because it'll help to inform your own practice and your own, your own teaching. So once we show the utility of math, then it's like, oh, wow, like in my everyday life, this is how I can use the stuff that's in the textbook or the stuff that I've kind of been conditioned to be uncomfortable with, right? So I think that, and I think once we do that and do that a lot more, then people will start to see, okay, like, they'll start to kind of embrace math more. Mm-hmm. And then once they embrace math more, then they'll start to practice it more. And then once they practice it more, then it's almost like, they'll be kind of trained in the systematic process, the same process that you use, to solve math equations. You'll be doing that just in everyday life, whether you have like an agreement with like, your significant other, or, a coworker at your job, or like somebody in traffic, or somebody, a customer service agent that you're trying to talk to that's like, not really giving you what you want right away, because people often will say that, that question of, when they say, when am I going to use this stuff? They think, they kind of follow that up a lot of times with like, oh yeah, I'm never going to be in a grocery store, like had to like, break out the Pythagorean theorem, and which is true. You're not going to, you won't. But the issue is, if you know how to use the so-called Pythagorean theorem, because he studied in Africa under our ancestors, but if you know how to use that and go through that process of solving a word problem that requires a squared plus b squared equals c squared, that kind of trains you. It trains you in a way of thinking, in a way of approaching problems, gathering your information, understanding, okay, well, what numbers do I replace what letters with? It teaches you how to think systematically. So then when you are in that grocery store, I mean, you're thinking that there are a lot of variables involved. I mean, you got a certain amount of money. You don't have unlimited money. You gotta prepare. You gotta get food to prepare meals for a certain amount of people to last you a certain amount of time. So when you're in that grocery store, you gotta approach that systematically in the same way you would approach that word problem in that math class. So that's kind of like how, developing those skills in that math class and using all those formulas and everything can really help in that situation. And I think that's something that like a lot of young people don't understand. Mm-hmm. And part of it is just that, like they say, youth is wasted on the young. They don't know any better, but also a lot of times, not enough explicitly telling them that.
I think that's the bigger problem, that we, a lot of times as educators, we don't give them the application of the knowledge that we say that you have to learn by rote. And part of the other issue is too, we always do things from a deficit model. Mm. And when you do that, you put the negative, you're always putting the negative first. And you can't really get somebody to see either a process or a bit of information that's transformational if you say, if you don't learn this, or if you don't get this, then you're going to have nothing but negative consequences. It doesn't work that way. And it also doesn't work to really make us true agents of our own destiny either. And I think one of the things that we've done, not a lot of things, but this is especially true when it comes to mathematics, is we don't see it we haven't shown our young people that, hey, this is a pathway. Why? Because, as you were saying before, it teaches you how to think. It teaches you how to think in process, mm-hmm. right? To weigh and measure situations and circumstances, and to be able to chart out a pathway in a systematic or a methodical fashion. And that's something that we don't press. But then you said something a little earlier about kind of like that differentiation between teaching mathematics as a skill set that's as a numerical skill, a skill set with numbers, versus the kind of like the socio-political implications of mathematics. And it's like, it's never separated. It's always social. It's always socio-political. Why? Because everything that we teach, and therefore everything that we need to learn, has socio-political implications in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? So I think the thing that I've learned most from the mathematicians in my life is that you all are excellent thinkers in circumstances that have a lot of unknowns, mm-hmm. and that are somewhat unexpected. Just the way that mathematicians think through issues and problems is extraordinary in a lot of ways. And we want our kids, we want our students to build that kind of stamina, mm-hmm. when it comes to dealing with issues with problems. So I think one of the things that I wanted to ask you about was what kind of pushback have you seen or have you experienced in the past year or so since we last talked? Or have you experienced any pushback? Has it been pretty well receptive?
It's been pretty well received at this point, because I'm kind of I'm kind of going around people that are already open-minded to what I'm doing, and especially like because in the last year or so I've made a commitment to really try to promote the YouTube channel. So a lot of my conversation is like around that. I mean, also around the book as well. But the book just came out in June. But prior to that, I'm like really letting people know about this YouTube channel and just letting people see like, listen, like this is really a resource. It's an online resource. It's free and readily available, and I'm giving top quality instruction in these videos and whatnot. And even in the videos, you're getting like hystematics, which we talked about before. Where I'm infusing the history with the mathematics, using history to teach math, using math to teach history, and whatnot. So I really haven't ran into, too much pushback, but then I haven't really, ran into spaces where, people, will get upset with you when, you start talking about, the fact that Pythagoras studied in ancient Kemet. I haven't really been in those spaces. I kind of been in like friendly spaces and spaces that are very open-minded to this. And I think that a lot of our people, whether it be formal educators or just parents or whatnot, they recognize that, we have a lot of math deficiencies collectively. My thing is what I'm also trying to do is get us to get away from math being what I term an accepted deficiency. Because a lot of our people are just like, they feel like, they're overwhelmed. They feel like, I'm just, or I wasn't born with that math gene. That's another back on. I do think they might be born with more of a proclivity for the, mathematical concepts to come to them more naturally and for them to understand it quicker. But I definitely believe that everybody has the ability to learn, math, even at a high level. Like I'm not, people might assume that because I teach math and I, tutor math and whatnot, that, things come easily to me. But even back when I was younger in K through 12, a lot of stuff didn't come quickly to me. I used to have my classmates that would just get it, but I had to, go home and like really study and practice, to catch up to them sometimes. But over time, a lot of things, seem to be much easier to me now because I've just dedicated so much time and I've tutored so many students and I've taught so many students, and it's just that repetition. And then also I have the luxury of being able to say that I've encountered different types of mathematical learners. So I've seen, math, I've been forced to try to explain it in different ways that a lot of people might not have, had to explain it, so I'm seeing it in different ways. So it's helped to like broaden my horizons just around mathematics generally. So a lot of this stuff just, comes naturally.
Yeah. So let me put a pause right there and just ask you a question. Like how, in your experience, what's been your go-to for trying to break that barrier in a person whose reticence towards math is really tied to that self-confidence? They feel like they're just not good at it. They feel like they just can't do it. Like, where do you go to as an educator to start breaking that barrier?
I try to give them opportunities to win and get some right answers. And then, and reinforce the fact that they got the right answers, Also exploit the fact that, any math problem is a multi-step process. So I might say, okay, you set the equation up correctly. Boom, that's a win. You did that right. But a lot of times what we'll do is we'll say, okay, here's the problem. And there's an answer. And then we focus only on, well, did they get the correct answer at the end? But they had to go through a 5-step process and they had to think about how to set up those 5 steps. And then sometimes we don't, pay respect to the fact that they were able to do those 5 steps correctly, even if they did get the incorrect answer. Right. So that's one thing. But also I talk about sometimes to people about, I question them in terms of what metrics are you using to self-identify yourself as a poor math student or not a math person. Because I think this is what often happens. I think that, you know, the standard that we compare ourselves to is really an unfair standard, you know, a lot of times. And, you know, you may be comparing yourself to somebody like, you know, my son or my daughter, right? I started teaching my son algebra when he was 6. We started doing simple equations. My daughter Asada the same way. Young age, they're doing algebra. So if you're in a classroom with them and you're looking at them and the teacher gives y'all a problem to do and you're looking at them to compare, you're setting yourself up for failure. Because if you don't have that type of background, you know, my children are very advanced, not genetically necessarily, but because of what I've taught.
The training,
I started teaching them.
Yeah.
But you can't compare. It's not fair to yourself. You're not being fair to yourself to compare yourself to my child if you're sitting in the classroom with them. And I think a lot of us do that. We don't know people's backgrounds. You know, I might have, you know, did that, you know, and felt like I wasn't as good at math at times because I'm comparing myself to this, you know, other student who has a tutor. He's getting tutored in math every day after school. Or he's doing like a program that I'm not doing. Or he might have had a different foundational background, just like my children have. So I think it becomes discouraging because we're dealing in unfair comparisons, right? Another thing is this, like I talked about how, you know, when there's a multi-step process to get to the answer in a math problem. You might have took a math class where you had a teacher that didn't give partial credit, which, you know, and I see the value in that, you know, in certain circumstances, but the teacher doesn't give partial credit. So you take a quiz, hypothetical situation, teacher gives a quiz, it's got 5 questions. Okay. On 3 of the questions, you get the wrong final answer. However, within those questions, a lot of your work was correct. But you made small errors. You might have forgot a negative sign, or you know, instead of doing 3 divided by 2, or like, you know, 6 divided by 2, you mistakenly did 6 minus 2, right? Small error, right? You get 3 questions wrong out of 5. You got 2 of them right. You get a 40 on the quiz. That's not a fair reflection of your level of understanding.
Yeah.
And I wonder how many thousands and thousands of people have had those experiences where, and then the teacher might not have had the time or the opportunity to really sit down with you and, like, you know, drill down into, like, okay, your actual work to help to instill some of that confidence in you. But you're just looking at it like, I got a 40, I failed. And I failed. I'm not good at math. Not knowing and not realizing that, wait a minute, within those 60 points that you lost, you did a lot of correct mathematical work. You actually demonstrated a certain level of understanding of these concepts, but the grade doesn't properly reflect that. But then you carry that with you thinking like, oh, like, you know, yeah, I'm really not that good at math, not knowing that you're much better than what you think you are. So with people like that, I often offer that to say, like, you know, and usually that is my experience. Like I come in contact with people that kind of present themselves like, yeah, I'm not really good at math. I never was. I'm not a math person. And we start doing a little bit of work. And then I'm looking at what they're doing and how they think and how they're processing, you know, information and whatnot. I'm like, you're not as bad as I thought you were. Like that very, very often happens.
Yeah. And they're not as bad as they thought they were.
Yeah, they're not as bad as they thought that they were.
Yeah.
But sometimes you need like that kind of like that coach to kind of like bring that out of you. And that's another thing that I've learned in this process of like building the company and doing a lot of tutoring is the emotional aspect of mathematics. Really, it's the emotional aspect of learning, because a lot of people are made to feel that they're not good at math. So what we have to do is make people feel at least that they can succeed at math. And a lot of that doesn't happen. And I reflect on my own teaching experience. And I'm like, a lot of times I'm like, I didn't focus on that. I was so focused on just the content, the raw content. I want to make sure in the content, the procedures to get the answers. And I'm not even really actively trying to make sure that you feel good about this process. But I'm realizing how important that is. Like for so many people, for a lot of people, that's really all it is.
That's exactly what it is. If we're gonna make mathematics a part of our liberation strategy, breaking through the phobia and the trauma that people have had in trying to learn mathematics. Like that's key. That's key. Yo, and I also gotta say that I love the way that you teach on your YouTube channel, because you do such a thorough job of breaking things down in those individual pieces.
I appreciate that. That's intentional. And that's why some of the videos get a little lengthy. And some people have asked me, like, can you make some shorter videos? And I try to take that into consideration. And some of them are shorter than others, but I'm like, especially on YouTube, I prefer to make them longer because I from my classroom experience, I know what the parts are that the students aren't understanding. So if you notice how I like kind of dig in, and I'm like, look, I know you might get this part wrong, but I want to overly emphasize to focus in on this. Like when you get to this part of this particular problem, don't make this mistake, because I've seen that mistake thousands of times just from my experience. And also I realize a lot of times it's a conceptual breakdown a lot of times. So then I'm like, okay, well, let me spend some extra time focusing in on this, because this holds a lot of people back. And this is why they don't understand, this or that or whatever, or even something like, order of operations. Like I might take extra time to talk about how PEMDAS can be misleading, because where, PEMDAS, the M is before the D. So it'll make you think that you're always supposed to multiply before you divide. When in fact, it really depends on which operation is first. If multiplication is first, do that first. But if division is first, then you divide first. But a lot of people just memorize PEMDAS in school as the mnemonic device. And, and this is why we see people arguing on Facebook and, and on Instagram about these math problems. They try to multiply all the time. It was that detail that was left out, whether maybe their teacher didn't tell them, or maybe they just forgot that footnote, basically, where you multiply or divide depending upon which operation comes first, right? And then I think, with addition and subtraction, it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect the outcome, right? But with multiplication and division, it definitely affects the outcome.
Yeah.
So, stuff like that. So I might like really spend more time and just like focus in on that, because I want people to like remember that, and think about it all the time.
That's great. I'm glad you mentioned the YouTube videos, Jason. For those who may not have had a chance to connect with you on YouTube, can you explain more of what it is that you're doing, why you're doing? I mean, I know we can kind of assume, right? Yeah. But just share with us kind of the background of starting that YouTube channel and the lessons and all that, and what you're accomplishing in that space.
Yeah. So a few reasons. One reason is, I started all this math as a tutoring company. We were focusing on math, right? So, but then after some time went on, I realized that, I was only one person, and it's only 24 hours in a day, and I can't tutor everybody myself. And even though I even recruited my son, who's a freshman at Morgan now, when he was like a freshman, I had him, doing some tutoring. But even, the two of us, we can't tutor everybody either. And it's still 24 hours in a day that each of us have. So I said, well, let me start to create content that people would have access to, that, can actually serve in lieu of an actual tutoring session. You can go to the YouTube channel and, just kind of, get some instruction, Another thing that motivated me to, go forward with the channel was, that was the pandemic, of course, so a lot of people were creating online content, in a lot of areas of life, especially educational. So there was that. But also, in one of my tutoring sessions, I recall there was a young sister I was helping out, and her teacher had assigned the class a Khan Academy video. And in this tutoring session, what ended up happening was we spent the majority of the tutoring session with me explaining the Khan Academy video.
Yeah.
So then I said, wait a minute, why don't I just cut the middleman out and just make more content? So therefore, in that situation, because I would like to think that in that situation, had that young sister had one of my videos, then she wouldn't have needed somebody to explain my video, because my video thorough is going to be more personal. You're going to see me, she might identify with me more, than kind of like, because Khan Academy has its value. It's good for me when I need to brush up on something I may not have seen in a while or haven't taught in like 7 years or whatever. But for somebody that may lack math confidence, it may not really be as helpful as other resources. So, and also like, with the channel, it enables me to teach, in ways that I've always wanted to teach, right? In ways that I still currently do teach, and it enabled me to like, promote historical awareness. That's where Histomatics comes into play. Promote historically Black colleges. Show the example of a Black man embracing math, embracing STEM, and so for our young people to see that. I remember, I've talked about this before because I got a Hillman College sweatshirt. So in one of my videos, I had my Hillman College sweatshirt on, and I talked about how, when I was young, I used to watch A Different World after the Cosby Show went off, and I remember Dwayne Wayne's character. He was an engineering major. He was from Brooklyn, and he wore Jordans, and I thought that was cool. And it's like, wow, this brother, wears Jordans. I think he's cool. I mean, he was a little. Kind of the way his character was portrayed in the first or the earlier seasons, kind of like piece around, and she was trying to kind of Steve Urkel him a little bit. But
but he manned up. He took his perfect SAT score in math, and he manned up a little bit, man. It was good.
So he was still cool. He was a cool brother, and he was proficient at math, and I always remember that. So I think that it makes a difference. So I mean that's the type of representation that I think matters. I think sometimes. The concept of representation mattering can be kind of weaponized against us in order to get us to not try to build our own institutions, instead just go representatives and institutions controlled by other people. But that type of representation I see is valuable. So I want our young people to, see Black people doing math and see Black people comfortable at math, and also be able to learn some history at the same time. And and I like doing that because that part of that is the influence I've had from growing up listening to hip hop, listening to rap music, and even with the commercial rappers and how they're talking about being drug dealers and drug kingpins and whatnot. They're always name dropping, right? Name dropping this like designer clothing brand, or name dropping this car manufacturer brand. So I'm like, all right, you know what? Watch this. So I'm in the video, teaching math, and I might have a Thomas Sankara t-shirt on. So I'm name dropping Thomas Sankara because I want you to know about Thomas Sankara. I want you to know who he was. And then, hopefully you go do some of your own research. And I might have my Patrice Lumumba t-shirt on, or my Assata Shakur t-shirt on, or my, Fannie Lou Hamer hoodie, So I want you to know about these people. And then you can come kind of in that concentrated location. You can come to the YouTube channel and get all of that. So I'm gonna give you some of the history, and that's really what Histomatics is also as well. Like you're gonna get some of your history, and then we're gonna solve these equations, and we're gonna do both. And really, it's a mirror of how my classroom is set up. So I'm just kind of bringing my classroom practice to the internet, to YouTube.
It's dope.
For the world.
And I the thing that I appreciate most is the interdisciplinary approach. Because that's how our life is integrated, and thus our learning should be integrated also.
Right.
And so the way that you integrate the history along with the problem solving, along with the mathematical terms, it's a beautiful thing to see. And for those of you who haven't been out there, you haven't gone to the All This Math YouTube channel, you should go. It's over 600 videos of content. It's real over there, and it's very helpful in that. But I gotta ask you, bro. So how did you move from generating over 600 videos of content to becoming an author and making a book? How'd that happen?
Good question. I always wanted to write something, wanted to have something documented, and kind of have like create a catalog of work. And I think again, it was partially years ago, when I would be very critical of commercial rappers. And the content that they were creating and putting out to our community, I had to take a step back and realize that, because I'm talking to my students and they're listening to 2 Chainz, and 2 Chainz is telling them things that are basically teaching them to be fiscally irresponsible and and hyper consumerist and all these types of things. But then I had to sit back and think of, but 2 Chainz has a catalog of work though. He has a body of work. I don't. Right. I'm teaching, but I don't have anything that's gonna, outlast me, when I'm physically gone. So that's kind of like years ago, I started thinking about, writing books. In the last couple of years, I started thinking about, like, what would I write? And I said, what does our community need? And one of the things I came up with, I realized, is that we need ways for us to like prepare our children for math class. Because like a lot of people, and I think this is how we're conditioned, like all of us, if we're sending our children to public, charter, or private schools, we kind of have been conditioned to just outsource that responsibility for mathematics to the school. Because we say, well, hopefully you have a good math teacher. Your math teacher has an education degree, has a strong math background, and they can teach you. But our children go into these classrooms and they're unprepared. They don't know what a ratio is, what a proportion is. And that's seen as normal, even if they're on grade level. And the expectation is just that the teacher will provide all that information. But what I think is that our children got to be prepared for that. And really in a larger sense, I think that with all the challenges that we have as a people with institutions that we don't control generally, namely public education, that they're weaponized and used as a tool against us to harm us. So what I want is for us to be able to use public, charter, and even private schools as places of practice to practice that the community has taught them. Whether your parents in the household, grandparents, uncles, aunties, big cousins, godparents, whoever, somebody on your block. And then if you go to school, then you go to school to practice what your old heads already taught you, right? So then I said, well, how can I make this happen? So this book is a way where to make that happen, in the sense that I take everyday activities, and each chapter represents a different everyday activity, or something like running an errand, or going into the kitchen and get a snack, or riding in the car, playing with the radio dial, or riding in the car, looking at the license plate of the car in front of you. And I show how to take those everyday activities and teach and also reinforce arithmetic and algebra skills. So it's like by meeting parents where they are, because I know that in order for us to survive and thrive, Black parents are going to have to do more than what we traditionally have been doing. But then it's easy to say that, but then you got to give resources. You got to provide for people. You got to say, okay, well, look, because then a lot of times you can't necessarily just, start a program that somebody's got to drive to, somebody's got to take time out of their schedule. They might have to call out from work to do, because then that's an economic thing, right? Yeah. People got to pay the bills. So I'm like, with this book, I'm trying to really meet people where they are, and then say, okay, well, when you driving in the car anyway, or you walking around the corner, with your children anyway. When you're riding in the car, you look at that license plate of the car in front of you, see those numbers on there. That's an opportunity to practice addition facts. That's an opportunity to take those same numbers, practice multiplication facts, practice subtraction, division, all of that. Think of what the common multiples are of a couple of those numbers. Think about what the factors are of those numbers. You can do all of those things, right? So the book is really about, how to use all this math. Volume 1 is really about just meeting our people where they are, and showing them how to use the things that they're doing. Like unit conversions is one of my favorite chapters from the book. You can grab any product, a bottle of water. Bottle of water is typical bottle of water is 500 milliliters and 16.9 fluid ounces. So you grab the bottle of water in the kitchen, you and your child, and you say, well, from that information, if you know that, tell me how many ounces 1,000 milliliters is. And I show you in the book, it's a simple equation, set it up, simple equation, a proportion. I call it the Malcolm X method, because you got to do cross multiplication, right? So, whenever we say Pythagorean theorem, where, basically speaking to the ancestors, we're speaking to Pythagoras as an ancestor, but I don't want to talk to Pythagoras.
I love that.
Right.
Ancestor. So I want to invoke his name. So
he got something named after him he didn't even create. So why not?
Exactly. So with that, like, you can figure that out. It's a quick algebraic equation, multiplication and division, right? It's basically a 2-step process. But the thing is, it's not just about just showing them how to do it. It's about the repetition. So now you're learning, okay, this is how I convert, I convert between units, and I can figure out, because I know the relationship between milliliters and ounces. And then I can figure out any amount of milliliters. I know how many ounces that is. And then what it's doing is generating fluency. So you're generating fluency with mathematics, which is what a lot of our children are lacking. They never develop that fluency. And because they never develop that fluency, that math anxiety is able to creep up very easily. And then that math anxiety leads to the onset of like serious math phobia. So it's also meant to be a way to like, kind of shield them, or, I don't know if I want to use the term vaccinate them against math phobia, right? By developing and instilling in them these like foundational, fundamental math skills and having them be like math scholars at an early age. So by the time they walk into the classroom and the teacher's like, okay, well, today we're going to start, doing some work with fractions. We're going to talk about common denominators. It's like, okay, cool. I know what that is. We deal with that all the time in the house. I think a lot of times young people don't have the same anxiety associated with ELA because from a young age, they're learning the English language.
Right.
This is our first language. It's the language that they're using, that they're used to and they're accustomed to. So, you go into the ELA class and it's like, okay, I'm familiar with this. I'm familiar with this language because math is a language in and of itself. Yeah. But a lot of times in our households, in most households, I would say, we're not having mathematical conversations. And that's for a lot of reasons. So another thing the book is meant to do is create an environment to easily create an environment where we can start having mathematical conversations, where we can start practicing with math skills, practicing with fractions, because even fractions is like a form of language, right? Like if I have a chapter in there called candy fractions. So, and I use the example of a Kit Kat, a pack of Kit Kat bars.
Oh, wow.
So Kit Kat's broken into 4 bars. If you got your child, you give them a Kit Kat, give them a piece of a Kit Kat bar. Typically, that's what we'll say. Here, have this Kit Kat bar. But what I'm offering is, let's do this. Instead of saying here, this is 1 Kit Kat, which it is, I'm saying now let's think about that in terms of fractions, right? The context of fractions. This is also 1/4 of the package. So now when we're having conversations with our children, now we're introducing them to fractions at an early age. Now, on a socio-cultural level, I have some theories about this. I think that if we do that, that may help us to also instill in our children more of a sense of community and collectivism. Because while we are all individuals, once you really kind of really reinforce this idea that you're a part of a whole, now it's like, okay, like now I may really, function more like that. I'm more of a part of something, more of a part of a community, which of course is going to lead to a certain type of behavior. Because like when I'm in my neighborhood in North Philly and I see people ride down the street and take a whole like McDonald's bag of trash and just throw it right out the window onto the ground.
I can't deal, fam.
That person has
burns me up.
No investment in the community. They don't feel like they must not feel like they're part of the community, right? So I wonder about how if even introducing the math concept of a fraction and having people see, because like right now we're having this conversation, right? It's 3 of us. We're all, grown men, individuals, right? At the same time, we each represent 1/3 of this conversation.
Yeah.
So it's an issue of collectivism, So yeah. I'm also saying we could use math to promote that concept of collectivism.
I think you're right, and I think you landed on something really important when you pointed to the fact that you're opening up opportunities to have mathematical conversations. Because just like students don't always know how to talk about math, a lot of parents are in that position too, where their level of comfort with math stops at a certain point. Right. They feel like they can't push through. And so this is where I think your book can be really, really helpful for a lot of parents. It's going to be helpful to a lot of parents, period, but especially those who homeschool, who've already made the commitment that I'm going to do stuff. I'm going to teach my kids something. I need to find a way. And usually I can't teach them math. I'm going to teach my kids stuff, but I can't teach them math because that's not really my strong suit. But this opens the door to begin having those math conversations. And then you're not just teaching a kid, you're teaching the community, because if mom learns or if dad learns and kid learns, they're building knowledge together. And if the home is not the first community, then I don't know what is.
Right.
So I think it really, really works in that way. What one of the things that you mentioned earlier was systematics, right?
Yeah.
And when somebody opens up your book, are they going to get some hystematics in the book as well?
Yeah, so you get a little bit of hystematics. In one of the chapters where I talk about temperature conversions between Fahrenheit and Celsius and Fahrenheit, I talk about how, you know, when I was 30, I bought a Mercedes Benz. It was a used Mercedes Benz, but you know, I also mentioned, I'm like, yeah, it's a nice car, well made. But I also talk about the fact that, you know, it's not lost on us that, you know, it's a German automobile. And, you know, we understand, you know, about the Berlin Conference. I mentioned the Berlin Conference, or maybe I definitely mentioned Germany and the genocide in Namibia. And the fact that even when we're, you know, purchasing certain products and supporting certain companies, we can't de-link that from that nation that company is based in.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one of the things. And then just in some of the narratives, just like with the descriptions in the chapters, you know, there's like different references to history. There's a practice I have, right, where, yeah, I'm glad you asked me this question, right? I'm trying to see what chapter it is. I think so. There's a chapter I have called "Should We Drive or Fly?" Right, and it's about, you know, doing the mathematical calculations necessary, kind of like that a parent would do, right?
Yeah.
You know, family trip, we going on vacation. You know, we live in Philly, we going to Atlanta. Should we get plane tickets, or should we rent a car?
Yeah.
Well, maybe not rent a car. Maybe we take our own car, right?
Yeah.
But how much is the gas going to be? How much are the tolls? You know, all of that. So I show how to go through that process. So, like, hopefully, as a family, you know, you can incorporate the children into that process and get them thinking.
Yeah, that's beautiful, fam. That's beautiful. Because right? I'm thinking to myself, my wife probably wishes that I had gone to that chapter of the book. Because I'm always like, yo, we driving. I don't care how far it is. Where we going? California? What's that? 37 hours? We got this. Let's go. Let's go.
So the practice. So at the end of most of the chapters, I had practice problems. So at the end of this particular chapter, the practice is to plan a trip via car and by air to do a comparative analysis from your city to the following cities. So I'm naming these different cities. I'm like Atlanta, Georgia, once the headquarters of the Student Nonviolent Coordinator Committee. Chicago, Illinois, birthplace of George Jackson. Detroit, Michigan, birthplace of Choka Lumumba. Coldwater, Mississippi, home of the Ashe Academy. I know some people down in Coldwater, Mississippi. They got an independent school called the Ashe Academy. They actually just this past weekend I was down in Jackson for their Building Power Summit. Building Power Summit. You know, some good people down there. Decatur, Texas, birthplace of Sundiata Acoli, who also was a mathematician, was in the Black Liberation Army, along with Assata Shakur. That fateful day when the New Jersey State Troopers tried to assassinate them, they ended up murdering Zaid Malik Shakur. They shot Assata. Sundiata Acoli, I think he was recently released, I think earlier this year or maybe last year. Like 40 years or something like that. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, birthplace of Mumia Abu-Jamal. So this is like the essence of hystematics. This is a mathematical exercise, but I'm leveraging it to provide some historical context. You know, it's like, yeah, you know, plan a trip, you know, let's calculate how far or how much it would cost to, you know, travel to Cleveland, Ohio. But instead of it just being Cleveland, Ohio, let's go a little deeper. Cleveland is, and there's a lot of things I could have said about Cleveland, but I decided to say, well, Cleveland is the place where Ahmed Sekou Touré made his transition. He was in the hospital. And then we say, okay, well, so I want you to ask the question, well, who was he?
Yeah.
Okay. Now we're going somewhere now. Now we're talking about Guinea. We're talking about Pan-Africanism. We're talking about Kwame Nkrumah. We're talking about Kwame Touré. You know, we're talking, so we're having these different now. So now it's like I'm introducing that rabbit hole, giving you the chance to go down the rabbit hole, but I'm using the math to get you there.
Yeah.
You know, and yeah, you know, so yeah, I got like 20 examples. Raleigh, North Carolina, birthplace of Anna Julia Cooper. Hobson City, Alabama, birthplace of Dr. Bobby Wright. Bobby Wright was from Hobson City, Alabama. You know, but yeah. So this is a good example of how hystematics is implemented in here. And then I got another chapter a short chapter on negative ages. This actually might be my favorite chapter, actually. Negative ages. So what that gets into, a lot of children don't get introduced to negative numbers until they get to algebra, right?
Yeah.
8th grade, 9th grade. I think that's too late. I think actually, I believe that we should introduce children to negative numbers as soon as we introduce the counting numbers. It's just a mirror. It's a reflection of the positive numbers anyway.
I think it's important because it establishes the number line, right? And then there are plenty of ways that they can. There are plenty of places that they can apply it, whether it be temperature or So
right. So with the negative age, and this is something that I randomly came up with a few years back. With talking to Asada, my daughter, and so I would explain stories to her about situations and experiences I had in my own childhood. And then I would say to Asada, like one day I just randomly was like, well, how old were you when that happened? And then she looked at me, I was crazy, right? But what it became was like a mathematical exercise because she knows that she was born in 2012. And she knows that I was born in 1980, right? Or at least I told her I was born in 1980. And then if I telling a story, and this is something that happened when I was 8 years old, right? So then she can do the math and say, okay, well, if you were 8, that means that happened probably in 1988, right? My birthday's in May. It could have happened. I could have still been 7, but for sake of simplicity, we'll say it happened in 1988. So now what she can do is she can do the calculation to figure out the difference between the year 2012 and the year 1988. And then she can say, and also it creates a closeness because it's like you weren't physically alive. I was 8 years old, but we're still connected.
It's powerful.
So it's like that's 12, but that's 24. So she was negative 24 years old. She was negative. So it's like, Dad, I was negative 24 when that happened. When you was 8 years old, I was negative 24. Right. And I think it's really dope for especially for the sisters, for mothers, considering that, girls are born with all of their ovaries. Yeah. So their future children are with them. Like already.
They're born with all of their eggs already inside them, ready to go. Yeah. That's powerful, man. That's
so. And in the practice section, I just identify all of these different years, these random years, when different things happen. Similar to like how the different how like the Black Seeds calendar and whatnot. I just list all these years, like how old were you in 1887? Birth year of Marcus Mosiah Garvey. How old were you in 1947? Birth year of Assata Shakur. How old were you in 1936? Birth year of Winnie Mandela. So I guess like I mentioned, it's like a way to feel like a closeness to these people, because a lot of times when history is taught, it's like it's taught in a vacuum where it's like, well, that was, I don't got nothing to do with them people. That was 100 years ago. I don't got nothing to do with me. But what if you think about it like, well, I wasn't on the positive side of the number line yet, but I'm still connected.
Yeah.
I was negative 85 years old when that happened. Just like how today, like, Malcolm made transition, was assassinated in, 1965, right?
Yeah.
But every time his birthday comes around, we still say happy birthday.
Right.
As if he was still physically with us. But he's not physically with us, but he's still with us though.
Yeah. So having a way to reach back and have that connection. Yeah. I'm hearing you, man. I'm hearing you. That's high frequency. And it's a way, it promotes living memory in a different way.
Yeah. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get people to see, like, so it's like it's a historical conversation that you're having when you're doing that, but you're teaching, arithmetic with negative numbers. So or you're teaching arithmetic with negative numbers in order to have that historical conversation, because you can't have that historical conversation without a grasp of that mathematical concept.
Right.
Which is what I worry about a lot of times, which is another impetus for hystematics, is because, like, as an example, a lot of people don't understand the concept of percentages, right?
True.
But you can sit in a history class and read a paragraph that includes percentages, like 47% of Africans did this, or not, in Nigeria this happened.
Yeah.
But if you don't really know, like, you can read that, right? You might know how to pronounce the words and understand the percent symbol, but if you don't know what the concept of a percentage is, that piece of information is not as meaningful.
Yeah.
I want it to be meaningful. So I want the history to even make more sense, but it's going to require having an understanding of mathematics in order to get to that point.
The way our understanding of math can impede or actually enhance our understanding of all the information that we're oftentimes given during the course of a day is huge. And I never really thought about it in that sense. Mm-hmm. It's almost like reading a passage and skipping over like 8 to 12 words. But those 8 to 12 words might have everything that you really need to know to understand what's going on, and also to be able to share that information with others. Because understanding something only 80% of the way probably means that you're going to be silent on it in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? Because you don't feel confident to give that knowledge to somebody else.
Yeah. And there's another project that I'm going to be working on going forward is, in terms of hystematics, taking texts that I think that everybody in our community would benefit from reading, but actually using them as mathematical textbooks, right? Like, for example, I take, Miseducation of the Negro. I think all of our people benefit from having exposure to that book, having, read it. But what if, but my goal is to go into Miseducation of the Negro and look for the content that Woodson put in there and then create math problems based on that content. So not only are you, learning the content and absorbing the content that Woodson put in there, but you're also using it as a tool to learn mathematics. And then also even more deeply about what Woodson is saying, because you're applying like a quantitative analysis to it, as opposed to it being, more anecdotal.
Right.
But there's so many books we could do that with, like, especially books like, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. Like, you start reading that, and Walter Rodney's like hitting us with like percentage and dollar amounts, and all of these, Du Bois with Philadelphia Negro, and just a lot.
It's an important approach to have, because it takes those books out of just the realm of reading them as, historical tome, or reading them as biography or whatever the case, and also extrapolating knowledge out of it that we can actually utilize. Like, I'm rereading the autobiography of Malcolm X with the kids, and in this rereading, I really had to settle in the time that he spent with his mom before his mom was committed to a mental hospital, and he's there. His mom and dad were Garveyites, and he's soaking up Garvey in that time, but also in the way that they homestead, the way that they utilize the land and the things that they're planting. And I said, I really just need to take a moment and kind of just tease out of this particular chapter what they're growing, how they're hunting, what conversations they're talking about. And to be perfectly honest, we had started reading the book way back in February. Yeah. And we stood there for about a month and a half, 2 months, just talking about the impact of Garveyism. We started working, just started reading more Garvey, started thinking about, can we grow? Because it's springtime now. Can we grow some of the things that they grew in their garden to sustain themselves? So those kind of conversations can get really, really dope. And so the more that you're talking about, pulling out the mathematics in our canon, the books that we should read for liberation, I think that's a powerful project. So get on that.
We actually got some. So my father has a nonprofit called the William J. Watkins Senior Institute. It's based in Baltimore, and we actually were awarded some grant money. So we're going to be doing a summer program starting in summer 2024, where we're going to be doing hystematics. I forget the specific title that I chose, but basically what I just described. So hystematics, word problem study groups.
Nice.
like 20 middle school students, 20 high school students, and we're just going to be going through text. But we're going to be analyzing text and reading certain passages from certain texts. Like I think I chose like Asada, autobiography of Malcolm X. What's another one? The autobiography of Marshall Eddie Conway, because the program is going to be based in Baltimore. So chose that book, on purpose. But also like pulling out, and creating math word problems based on that content. And then, which will help us to, again, help them to understand the mathematics and be able to better quantify, the information. Because it's one thing, I remember I was reading one of Nkrumah's books, Neo-Colonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism. And as I'm reading it, I'm like, man, like I knew Nkrumah was dope, but I didn't really know he was that dope until I read that. Because I'm like, wow, he's identifying specifically the tonnage that, bauxite Belgians stole, that, the amount of cocoa that the French took from this country. And he's not just saying like, yeah, they did this and they did that. He's like, nah, so it was like a finance textbook.
Yeah.
But it was different because I was a finance major in undergrad. So I immediately saw the contrast, because it wasn't like the finance textbooks that more mainstream books that I had seen, where it's just like, kind of like just, capitalism is the only way. And this is how you kind of like navigate capitalism so that you can win at it. Right. He's like saying, okay, this is the other side. Because, in capitalism, you got winners and losers. So he's like, oh, this is what they did. They took this and they took that. And he talked about DuPont and how DuPont was selling gunpowder to Napoleon, during the Haitian Revolution and all of that. So you're getting real specific, about the amounts and, the quantities. And I just was like, but it helped me to even gain a better understanding of, the experience of what colonialism really was like. Because we know it's bad, but it's like, but I look at it like, when you can apply the math to it, then you really know how bad it is.
Exactly.
Specifically, it's kind of like if somebody rob you, God forbid somebody robs you, and then it's like, yeah, that's messed up. They took my money. Nah, how much money did they take? Now they took $5.13. like that's worse than just say they took my money.
Yeah, but it's important because we always undersell the savagery of exploitation because we rarely attach the specifics. To be perfectly honest, that's what's happening in terms of the war around what's being taught and what books are going to be banned and all this other kind of stuff. Because if you hide the specificity, it makes it easier to overlook, and it also makes it harder to assign blame. And that's part of the issue. So knowing what the numbers are, that's critical. That's critical part of our understanding, because we need to understand the nature of the exploitation, and we can't do it without the numbers.
That's the key. That's the key. Man,
this is crazy. Every time you come through, man. Every time I talk to you, I'm just like, shit, how come I don't talk to you more? every single time, every time it happens, man.
We both be too busy. We both be out here doing too much work, man.
Yeah. But hey, we're gonna find some time to actually get together in person. Yeah. Now I gotta ask you this: the book sounds phenomenal. Of course, people know, or people should know how to find you on YouTube. But how can they get their hands on the book?
So the book currently is available on Amazon. It's on Amazon for $34.95. How to Use All This Math, Volume 1. I currently have a couple of copies available that aren't earmarked for anybody else, but I haven't set up. I'm not set up to actually do my own distribution as of yet. I will, but I just currently am not. So Amazon would be the best bet for you to get a copy of the book. How to Use All This Math, Volume 1. Or if you forget the title, just type in my name, Akil Parker. It's the only book I have on there, so far. I was intentional about naming this Volume 1 because I know there's going to be Volume 2. I have an outline of Volume 2. I have another 20, teachable moments, so to speak, or everyday activities that can be leveraged into, developing our children in terms of arithmetic and algebra. Also, volume 2 is going to have more geometry. This book doesn't have much geometry in it. It's got a little bit of geometry, like dealing with the analog clock and, how each, you can think of each piece of the analog clock as like a sector, as a geometric sector of a circle. So it's got a little bit, but I'm going to get more heavy into geometry in volume 2. Because I want our children to, again, like go into, geometry class ready. Because a lot of our children are going into these, math classes and they're unprepared. So it's kind of like going into a boxing match with no training against somebody that's a world-class fighter. And, you would get your head boxed off. And this is what's happening in math classes. Our kids are getting their head boxed off by math. And then it turns them off to it. That in combination with just all of the general propaganda around math anyway, that's telling them math is too hard, math is irrelevant, you should stay away from math. And a lot of children have parents that, kind of, reinforce those ideas. As soon as your mom or your dad says, well, I was never good at math, or I can't help you with that. It almost serves as like a justification for them to not apply themselves. Yeah. And especially figure, if you've provided a certain like comfortable lifestyle for your child. Because if I'm a child and I'm sitting there struggling in math and I'm like, yo, like, why do I need this? Like, we got central air, both my parents got cars. I get, new sneakers whenever I want. You know what I mean? I got a cell phone. My cell phone bill is always paid. My parents are doing something right. And they admittedly are not good at math. So why should I try? But one of the things that children don't understand is, the timing of the society. Maybe like your parents were able to secure a certain livelihood based on the timing, whereas that type of opportunity may not be available, most likely will not be available to you as the child, in the year 2030.
Yeah, real talk. And what did you say before? You said a term earlier in the show. It was an acceptable deficiency.
Accepted deficiency.
Yeah.
Math is an accepted deficiency. It's almost like people kind of not celebrate, but they kind of trauma bond. They trauma bond with, having had challenges in math. It's almost like, but it's like with reading the English language, people are a little more embarrassed about that. Like people aren't as proud to say that they can't read or they're functionally illiterate. They will never say that. But with math, it's like, for some people, it's cool to not be good at math because I think they don't understand the implications of that.
I think that's true. And also they've met so many people that have the same fear, and they can rest. They can rest in that.
They're in the middle of the bell curve. So it's a popular group. It's a very popular group. Yeah.
But we got to break through. Because we can't stay here. We can't.
Definitely.
Brother Akil, I appreciate you, man. This is powerful work, powerful words. Everybody, if you're listening, you need to go to YouTube. You need to go to All This Math. Just type it in, and you're going to have a bounty of resources that you can use to help your child and also you understand mathematics better, and also for you to understand how contextually mathematics is our story. It belongs to us. It belongs to us. And you, ma'am, you, sir, you, brother, you, sister, you're a mathematician. You're a mathematician at heart. Why? Because your people were. Your people are. Your ancestors were. Your ancestors are mathematicians through and through. So let's go and reclaim that heritage. Brother Akil, appreciate you, brother.
Likewise, bro.
Now, you all know that usually at the end of every show, we end with a prayer, and this is no different. So, God, we just thank you for this moment. We thank you for Brother Akil. We ask that you bless his endeavors, all the things that he's doing, all the things that he produced. Bless his mind, allow it to be expansive, and allow him to be able to convey the information that he has and to be able to help people process and move beyond their phobia and trauma that they have around math and mathematics. Help us to transform our attitudes and our understanding so that mathematics can be a tool for our own liberation. Lord, I ask that you would bless the person that hears this. Lord, I ask that you would release them from the spirit of fear that they might have around math or around learning. Lord, I ask that you would have them to walk in the truth that they can do this and that there's help for them to do it. And once they are free, then their child will be free also. Lord God, I ask that you continue to build in us a sense of agency and of our own liberation. God, we thank you. We praise you. We are thankful for this moment. We pray all this in your presence in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you.